Hey, so you have a regional coming up, you have a YCS coming up, you have locals even. Everyone's playing the Fire King Snake Eye deck, or just the pure Snake Eye deck, or whatever fire version is, suiting their fancy at the time, and you're not playing it. And you either don't want to pay for it, or you can't afford to pay for it, or you just want a challenge and you want to play Rogue. What are some things that we can do to, give ourselves the best chance at actually succeeding at that tournament, right? Because, this is kind of the boat I'm in. I'm not trying to pay for fire right now. I'm not trying to buy bonfires and wanted posters and all that kind of thing. I want to play with Rogue, or at least, anything right now except for fire is basically Rogue tier. So, yeah. And, this type of video will apply to any like tier 0 or tier 0-ish type format where there's just one clear best deck and we want to play something else. So what can we do? Well, let's take a look at this format in particular. I think there are 5 things that we can see if our deck does. 5, I guess, check boxes to see if we check the box with our Rogue deck to give ourselves the best chance at actually succeeding at a tournament without playing the tier 0 fire deck. Step 1. Number 1 is going to be Dimension Shifter. If your deck can play Shifter, you have a pretty solid advantage over the fire decks when you draw it. Right? And if we play 3 Shifter in our deck, we have about a 1/3 chance of drawing the Shifter in our opening hand. So, that being said, we have about a 1/3 chance of almost auto-winning the game against Fire King. Like, obviously your deck has to be good enough in the follow-up to be able to end the game on the next turn under Shifter. But, that being said, Shifter just wrecks the fire deck so hard that it's just a pretty solid strategy and a pretty solid checkbox for your Rogue deck to have. So there's a lot of decks that could actually play Shifter. We have Kashtira, which has seen some success in regionals the last couple weekends. Vanquish Soul, same thing. Even Sprite can play Shifter sometimes. Pearly can play Shifter in some cases. It's not ideal, but hey, like I said, if you can play Shifter, go ahead and play it. And then we have the traditional control-y Shifter decks, Floowandereeze, Exosister, and all that kind of thing, right? So, starting off, if you have a deck that can play Dimension Shifter in it, that is a at least solid Rogue choice to bring to a tournament in this format. Step number 2, or kind of along the same lines, not exactly as good as Shifter, but similar, is just Floodgates in general. If you can play enough Trap Floodgates, thinking Macrocosmos, same as Shifter basically, right? There can be only one, Rivalry of Warlords, Summon Limit, stuff like that. If your deck can facilitate those, even though they're not as good as Shifter, because they're really only good at going first, you have a shot. You have a shot if you draw enough of those in combination with your engine to really lock out any deck. Not only the fire decks, but just Floodgates wreck most decks. Unfortunately, it's the state of the game, and unfortunately, I have to recommend this to you in a tier 0 format where, we need some way to be able to compete with the best deck. But yeah, and we saw this last weekend with the Horus control deck. The deck just playing all of the Horus cards and the Light and Darkness Dragon, and then it played 8 or something Floodgates with summon limits, and there can be only one. And then there was another main deck, Floodgate 3 of, I forget what it was, Skill Drain, of course. But yeah, it's unfortunate that we have to resort to that. But hey, you want to win. Win's a win, man. So play whatever you need to do to get that W. Okay, now moving away from that a little bit, let's talk about what everyone else is playing. So everyone else is playing basically the same set of 5 hand traps in their deck, and we're talking about Ash Blossom, Imperm, Effect Veiler, Nibiru, and Droll. Ideally, your deck doesn't lose hard too many of those, right? So if you can pick a deck that just doesn't play into Nib and doesn't play into Droll, and where Imperm and Veiler are just okay, then we're set. And you're thinking, well, what the hell deck is that? What deck doesn't really play into all those cards? Labyrinth is probably the best bet. We have, it doesn't play into Nib or Droll. Imperm and Veiler are okay if they hit the Ariana. Sure, that's annoying, but it's not game ending. You still have the rest of your hand to work with. And Ash is pretty good into Labyrinth, sure. But hey, it's not a game breaker, especially with transaction rollback in the game. You might just be able to play right through that Ash, right? So everyone is playing the same 15 hand traps, the same 15 non-engine. If your deck just doesn't lose to those, right? If your deck just doesn't lose to those, then you're cooking. Like, your opponent is probably going to have 15 dead cards in their deck against you. Maybe 12 dead cards in their deck against you, right? So if you can play into the non-engine that everyone else is playing and not be affected, they're just down cards. They are, like, if they open 3 of those hand traps, if they open, like, Nib, Droll, Veiler into Labyrinth, like, you're cooking, because they basically have 2 to 3 dead cards in their hand. If you don't even draw Oriana, right, they have 3 dead cards in their hand. And you have to beat a 2-card hand with your 5-card opening hand, and that's pretty possible. So that's really the advantage that I think Labyrinth has in this meta, is that it's pretty good into the non-engine everyone else is relying on to beat the fire decks, including the other fire decks that are also all playing those hand traps. So you do have a pretty solid shot into that. And hey, there's not only Labyrinth, there's other, like, generally the decks that don't lose to those are, like, trap decks. So, like, Dynamorphia, that doesn't lose to Droll or Nib at all. So that's at least some kind of advantage for Dynamorphia. And then we have even Goaty. Goaty doesn't lose to Nib or Droll, or not even, like, Ash really is that bad. Just Imperm and Veiler are pretty good into Goaty. So, yeah, it's just an idea of stuff that we can be playing. Runic decks kind of lose to most of those hand traps, unfortunately, or, you know, but, like, it trades favorably into them, so that's at least some kind of advantage there. But yeah, it's just something to keep in mind. And now on the converse side, checkbox number 4 is you should be able to play all those hand traps yourself. So if you don't lose to those hand traps and you can still play them all into the fire decks, then that's even better of a chance, right? So, you know, there's a reason those 5 are the most commonly played and are the best hand traps right now. It's because they hit the fire decks the hardest, right? So if you can fit those in, then you at least have some kind of chance, right? And I'm thinking about decks that can fit 15 plus hand traps. I guess like Sky Striker, Marincess, even, I don't know, a lot of decks like Vanquish Soul and Kashtira can play a solid amount, like 12 hand traps, plus they can play Shifter, so that's even more advantage. So kind of decks like that can afford to play a ton of non-engine in order to try to combat the Fire King Snake Eye deck the best are going to have the best chances, right? And then kind of the last category of decks that I would say have a solid chance is, even if you can't play Shifter or Floodgates, even if you lose to Ash, Nib, Droll, whatever, and you can still play them yourself, you might play a deck that's so rogue or so new that people just don't know what the deck does and don't know where to hand trap. Like, even if you lose to Ash, if people don't know where to Ash you, then you're probably okay. And what comes to mind immediately right now is Raid Raptor, right? Raid Raptor it's not a new deck, but it got a lot of new support out of Phantom Nightmare. People probably haven't read it because they've just overlooked anything that doesn't have a fire attribute sticker on it. And people are not going to know how to play against Raid Raptor. People don't know what to side in. They don't know what to hand trap. The deck just goes off if they are uninterrupted in the right places. And you can put up unaffected stuff, rank up stuff, a whole bunch of crap that is really hard to get through unless you know what the deck does. And if you know what all the Raid Raptor cards do, you're probably at most part of 5% of the Yu-Gi-Oh community. So I think like Raid Raptor is a pretty solid choice to bring to an event, because everyone is going to be sitting there reading your cards. They're going to be wasting their time. They're going to feel rushed. They're going to have to interrupt whenever they can, and it's probably going to be in the wrong spot. And therefore, you're going to be able to steal some games that way, right? So, yeah, that pretty much wraps it up for kind of like 5 checkboxes for what your rogue deck should be able to, or should have, or like would ideally have in order to compete against something that's like around the tier 0 category. Honestly, we just saw like 80% of lists at Costa Rica had Snake Eye stuff in it, so that's basically tier 0, right? So yeah, those are 5 kind of categories of decks that we could be playing to be able to compete in this meta if we're not trying to play Snake Eyes ourselves. And you can kind of apply this to any type of tier 0 meta or close to it. You know, like we could have applied pretty similar analysis to the Kashtira meta a couple formats ago, or even the Tearlament meta a couple formats ago, like against Tear, if you could play Shifter, hey, you're in there. Against Cash, you better play a deck that doesn't lose to Shifter, right? So it kind of just shifts around where everything is in the categories, but generally you want to play stuff that's good against the best deck, obviously, and play stuff that doesn't lose to what everyone else is playing against the best deck. And that's going to give you the best odds of drawing hands that are able to beat your opponent's hand, because your opponent's hand is just not as relevant against you. Okay, so that pretty much wraps it up. Hope you guys enjoy. Hope you guys have good luck at your tournaments, your locals, your regionals, your YCSs coming up in this format, because it's going to be an adventure, certainly. If you are not playing the fire decks, even if you are playing the fire decks, it's going to be an adventure. So, yeah, looking forward to the next format. I got regionals in like 3-4 weeks or so in South Park, Pennsylvania. So hope to see some of you there. We'll catch you guys in the next one. We'll see you later. Thanks.